So our theme for September is Blossom, and Blossom is about growth and change, and that is not always neat. If you have ever done any gardening, you know how messy that can be. And it's also not always predictable. You might be familiar, if you are familiar with gardening, you may be familiar with the unpredictability of blossoms and growth. Sometimes unexpected things grow. Sometimes it's in unexpected places, or it doesn't necessarily happen when you're expecting it. So, that's also kind of part of the beauty, I think, of blossoms, is that it's not necessarily something that we can control, but it is always, just really fantastic once we see it. So our speaker has a story of unpredictability of blossoming at the heart of her story today. Stephanie Krimmel is a longtime member of Creative Mornings, so was very excited when she wanted to present. Stephanie is a multidisciplinary artist who explores time and scale and human experience, and she often creates large interactive art pieces that invite people to play and connect. She shows her work regularly in and around the Seattle area, including at Shift Gallery in Pioneer Square, and her projects often combine technology and collaboration, which can turn galleries into spaces for curiosity and discovery. So let's give a warm welcome to Stephanie Krimmel.
Hey everyone, good morning. I am one of those not so morning people, so please bear with me today. When I first heard about this theme of blossom, I really was thinking about it in sort of a linear and predictable way. You plant a seed in the garden and you water it and it grows and it blossoms, fruits, and it dies. But I have been a gardener. I was a gardener for 10 years at the Up Garden Pea Patch, which is a very cool place if you haven't been there. It's on the roof of the Mercer Street parking garage at Seattle Center. And I know that's not always how things work. Sometimes you plant a seed and it doesn't grow. Sometimes you get these plants that are called volunteers that just pop up out of nowhere. The conditions were just right and they grow and they blossom and sometimes bear the strongest fruit in the garden. And that is what my talk today is really about, is more like these volunteer kind of plants. It's what happened when I stopped trying so hard to plan everything and started moving without a map. So Lee introduced me as an artist, and one of the sort of obligatory things you need as an artist is an artist bio. And I am going to read you the first line from my artist bio from 2020 with the caveat that I find it kind of cringy, which is basically how I feel about anything I read about myself. But anyway, here it is. I'm both an early and late bloomer when it comes to art. It's always been in my heart and only relatively recently found its way out. So the story I'm going to share today is about how that happened. How I was an artist, and then I wasn't, and then I was again. And this is a story full of stops and starts and stumbles. And I got to tell you right now, it doesn't really have an ending, but it does have a beginning. So this begins in the 1990s when I was a student at the University of Washington, and about halfway through my freshman year there, I had this, I would call it a mini crisis. All of a sudden, I was like, wait, I didn't decide to be here. I didn't decide to go to college. It was just the expectation of my parents and everyone around me that I would go to college. And what do you know? Here I was. What about the infinity of other things that 18-year-olds can do after high school? Well, I hadn't even thought about those. And like I said, it was a mini crisis. So I was kind of upset about this for 5 minutes before I realized oh wait, I'm super privileged and lucky to have parents that care about my education. And oh my gosh, I have momentum. And really all I got to do is get a degree. So I'm here, I might as well do that. So I had this goal to get a degree, but I really didn't have any direction. I wasn't one of those people that went to college knowing that, oh, I'm going to be an electrical engineer, I'm going to practice law or medicine. All I had was sort of this inkling that I was going to do something creative. And so I decided, well, if my goal is just to get a degree, I might as well take the classes I like to do that. I decided I was going to take art classes. So I registered for Design 101, Drawing 101. And I mean, you might imagine, because I'm standing up here with the word artist under my name, that I enjoyed them. And I did. I got a degree in general art and art history. And it seems like this is the point in the story where I'm like, oh yeah, and the rest is history. But that's totally not how it went. So after graduating from college, I, did a lot of things that were not being an artist. I was a admin person for a health sciences department. I worked a job as an assistant in a print gallery, which was a position I left to basically do a gap year. I spent 18 months traveling around the country in a van. This was like van life before it was cool, with my husband, which, in retrospect may have been like a reaction to not deciding to go to college. But at the time, I just feel like this really grand adventure and an experiment. One, to see if my new husband and I could survive each other 24/7. Two, to see if there was anywhere better in the country to live than right here. And three, to really experience unstructured time. And so it was kind of the opposite of my college experience. In this case, I had some direction, but I had no goal whatsoever. And to answer the questions, yes, my husband and I survived. We're still married 30 years later. No, as most of you know, there is absolutely no better place to live than right here. And unstructured time, it takes some getting used to, but it is absolutely precious. So the other result of this was what I call a hard reset. So I came back to Seattle with nowhere to live, no job, and really not a lot to lose. And this is when I taught myself, this was the 90s, remember, this is when I taught myself some web technologies and HTML. And does anyone remember Flash? Yeah, I learned that. And I got a job working as an interactive developer, that was the title, in a graphic design firm where I learned a ton about brand and marketing and design. And well, that was all great. And I decided to leave that job as well and take another gap year, this time spending 18 months in Europe. And when I came back from that, well, the truth was that I really didn't want to interview and I really didn't want to write a resume. So I did what seemed like the easiest thing at the time, which was start my own company doing web design and development and UX work as well. And most of you are very familiar with project work. I'm sure you all have a lot of client work. I love this client work and project work because it has beginnings and ends. And I love the beginnings of things. They're like so exciting and full of potential and possibility. And I love the ends of things because it's like, yay, accomplishment. And honestly, sometimes relief. I'm not so fond about the middles of things. So I had this kind of mantra that I used to say. It was A, B, C, D, done. Meaning like, show me that goal. I'm going to get there in the most efficient, quickest way possible. And this led itself into my home life as well. So when my daughter was about 2, we started playing iPad apps on like educational games together. And some of these were great and the others were terrible. And I started a blog kind of detailing our experiences. And all of this was research for my passion project at the time, which was to create good iPad apps for toddlers. And so I made another company, this time to create, and actually created 2 iPad apps for toddlers. And what I loved about this process is that everything was so neatly twined together. So my research and, feeding one thing, and then also I could do all this with my daughter. And meanwhile, there was another startup in the works. This one was about leadership development and corporate culture. And of course I said yes, because I love the beginnings of things. So at one point in my life, this was about 8 years ago, I was actively involved in 3 different companies that I had co-founded or founded. And it had been about 20 years that I had been solving clients' problems, but not my own, and even more than 20 years that I had actively not been practicing art. And in 2017, I really reached a breaking point. So how did I know? Well, I think the biggest clue was that I had no energy whatsoever. It was gone. It was like, people talk about filling the bucket. Well, I couldn't even figure out how to fill it. The second clue was that I had no ideas anymore. My ideas were just gone. I'm typically one of those people that has a list of 20 or more ideas that may or may never get done. And they weren't there anymore. This was a super hard time for me. I think a lot of my self-worth and identity was wrapped up in my professional life. And all of a sudden that was gone because I really had to leave 2 of those businesses and drastically cut back the work I did in the third. I had no plan whatsoever. I did have unstructured time again, like I'd had on my gap years, but instead of feeling freeing, this time it felt absolutely terrifying. I suppose I had a goal to recover, but this wasn't the kind of A, B, C, D done goal that you could just go for and get done really quickly. I felt like I had a ton to learn and also to unlearn. And at this point in time, this was about when I first started going to Creative Mornings. It's also a time that I started seeking out books and people to help me. And some of these books you've probably heard of, things like Designing Your Life and Flow and books by Brene Brown. I also read more fiction at that time. And in one of those fiction books I read, which is The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman, there is the most beautiful metaphor for the formation of an idea. And I'd like to share it with you. This is from the perspective of Lyra, who is the child protagonist in the book. And this is what she says. The idea hovered and shimmered delicately like a soap bubble. She dared not even look at it directly in case it burst. But she was familiar with the way of ideas, and she let it shimmer, looking away, thinking about something else. And this is so different from like the North Star metaphor for a goal or an idea, something that you can just see and go for really directly. It's the kind of goal that I had been helping my clients define for the last 15 years and the kind I really didn't have for myself right then. So in this totally murky state, mainly what I did was observe. I paid attention to like what's giving me energy. And those were things like, seeing beautiful piles of leaves when I was out on my walks, or noticing the way that the light shimmered off the water. And I also thought about things I had really enjoyed in the past. And I'm like, oh yeah, I was an art major because I enjoyed practicing art. And so a little soap bubble was starting to form. I had one friend who had recently downloaded a digital painting app on the iPad, and she was raving about it. And another friend of mine had just committed to doing a drawing every single day. And I thought, And I bought an iPad Pro, an Apple Pencil, and I decided I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to learn something new by practicing digital painting for 6 minutes a day. Now, 6 minutes was totally arbitrary. It's what I thought I could give. And the only constraint I gave myself is that whatever I do, it's going to be square. Other than that, it's just completely open. I had no idea where this would ultimately go. But on May 7th, 2018, I sat down on my, with my 6-minute timer going. I sat down and I sketched the lilies on my patio. And this was in no way a masterpiece. Here it is right here, number one. But a couple things happened right away. One is that I realized, 6 minutes isn't very much. I could do this for an hour, especially while I'm learning. And I was really excited by it. So the next day I kept going, and I kept going the next day and the next day and the next. I did not use the timer at all anymore. I typically had no preconceived idea of what I was going to make when I sat down every morning, but I would kind of think about like, what color does this day feel like? Or what kind of lines, represent how I'm feeling today? And I'd add little bits of photos and text. And after a few months of doing this, I realized each image was like a little bit of a time capsule for me. And together they were like a visual journal, or actually kind of a self-portrait. And I called this series The Daily Art Habit. And it kind of built its own momentum. It gave me a sense of freedom because I could always come back to it the next day. And these questions that kept coming to me, like, what would happen if? What would happen if I tried this or that? And that was super exciting to me because my ideas were coming again. So I said earlier that I didn't have an idea of where this was going when I started, but old habits are kind of hard they don't die easily. So quickly my goal became to create individual works that I thought were good enough for gallery shows. And I first started showing my work in 2019, showing at a condominium lobby, and also like applying to group shows with open calls. Here's a couple of those. And one of these group shows with an open call, I won an award. This was at a small studio in Pioneer Square called Studio 103. And the prize for the award was that I was going to get to hang a solo show in their space in spring of 2021. And this was like totally exciting and awesome, but the timing wasn't great. So spring of 2021 was like in the middle of nobody's going anywhere because we are all stuck at home for COVID. So in retrospect, this actually I think was a good thing because I thought about the show as something for myself, like what do I want to see, as opposed to what other people might want to see. And as it happened, the timing of the show would roughly correspond with when I had finished 1,000 pieces in the Daily Art Habit series. And I thought, 1,000 is a lot. I don't know what it looks like anymore. I can't wrap my arms around 1,000. You're like scrolling on your phone through 1,000 images. They're like teensy. And I said, okay, this is what it's going to be. I'm going to make this show. I'm going to call it The First 1,000. I'm going to show everything. Yeah, right? And I mean, there were some challenges with this, but one thing that I thought in the back of my head was like, oh, that means I'm committed to make 1,000. And after that, I don't know what's going to come next. All I have to do is finish 1,000. So to make this happen, I printed out, it was actually a little bit more than 1,000 images at the time, the entire series on 4x4-inch cards. And then I arranged them on the walls of this gallery in rough chronological order, but also kind of organizing by color and value as I went. And this took 50 hours. So it was not fast. Ultimately covering 3 walls of the gallery in a composition that was about 40 feet long. And when I saw it all at once, it was really kind of an epiphany for me. All of a sudden I realized, oh, my work isn't about the individual pieces. It's about the collection, like seeing what the power of multiples. Also, the art isn't about the output of this process. It is about the process itself. Oh, and by the way, I realized right then that I was not going to quit at 1,000, that this thing was going to definitely continue. And I started to see myself as an installation artist at this point as well. So of course, like excited by all these realizations, I had another show about 5 months later, and I'm like, oh, I want to show it all again, and it's going to be bigger then. But there were some challenges with this. One, I did not have 50 hours to install it. I'd have to get a lot faster at figuring out how to hang all this. And 2, I actually didn't have as much space. So I had about 45 feet here in this space, and I was only going to have about 30 in my next space. So I decided to try something new. I still had all of my work printed, but I'm going to try and do visual aids and hold microphone at the same time. I attached pieces together in accordion books like this that were about 10 to 12 pieces long. And that solved a bunch of problems. One is that I could hang them a lot faster. So rather than hanging things individually on the wall, I now had strips of like 8 to 10 pieces that were already straight. So I didn't have to spend a ton of time leveling things. And it also solved the problem of not quite having enough space because these dimensionally came off the wall so I could fit more work into less space. And the result is what you see here. And this was shown at Shift Gallery in August 2021. It was a floating installation of accordion books. So it was about 30 feet long by about 4 feet tall. And this kind of experimentation led to a bunch more questions like, ooh, how else can I attach 4-inch cards together? I use like a linen tape, it's a bookbinder's tape. And how else can I use the source material from the Daily Art Habit series as a palette, like basically like my paint for other projects? The next projects that I had was a lot smaller. I only had like maybe a 10-foot space to work in. So I'm like, okay, it's not going to be the whole series. And I had this sort of like soap bubble idea that I wanted to make something round. Well, square cards don't really lend themselves to round very well, but I realized that if I have more visual aids here, if I scored my cards on corner to corner and folded them and connected them together, I could make a sort of pyramidal shape like this. And 6 of these make a hexagon, and a hexagon is a little closer to a circle than a square is. And so I made a piece to celebrate the winter solstice because this was going to hang in December. And here it is. I took the lightest images from the Daily Art Habit series, the darkest images, and then the rest of the images were things I had created on solstice or equinox dates. And I suspended this from the ceiling in this window gallery space. And I liked it. So you might not be surprised that led to a whole series, a seasonal series, and here's all of them together. So the pyramidal construction technique became the basis for a bunch more work. So I'm going to run through pretty quickly here. This is a piece called Feedback Loop. It was 65 feet long. This was another exhibition of all of the Daily Art Habit series at the time, which was about 1,700 pieces in 2023. Eye to Eye is another work. This is when I started making words with the pieces. This was 25 feet long from 2024. And most recently, these pieces, Hope, Love, and Joy, which were shown at Green River College, just came down about a month ago. So seeing my own work in big, constructed pieces like this made me think about, what would happen if I invited other people to participate in this process, which led to community projects. So this is a piece called Sammamish River that was done for the city of Bothell last last year, and I invited people to submit images that represented, the Sammamish River in Bothell, or just their feelings about that, and organized them together in this piece, which is about 18 feet long, and its shape mirrors the river as it goes through Bothell. And then another piece here, this one's from October 2024. It's called Election Therapy, and it was a way really trying to provide an outlet for people to dispel election-related stress. And if you ask me what's coming next, well, there's a ton of ideas, so I'm not really sure. But one thing I do know is that for the foreseeable future, I'm going to continue my digital painting practice and keep adding material to the Daily Art Habit series every day, because I've learned so much from this. I think for me, I've learned that progress isn't necessarily making something better every day. Honestly, there are days, weeks, even months where I kind of feel a little slumpy, but I am adding to my overall experience. And also that's super motivating, because just doing something every day, I'm like, oh, at least I did that, Also for me, this is me personally, but I need to prioritize quantity over quality, because if I had set out 8 years ago to make the perfect painting, you wouldn't see anything up here today. I also like that it's unfinished. Unfinished is good for me. It means that I'm not trying to deliver something perfect or fully complete. It doesn't have to be, it's just not as precious, I guess. And also success for me is not checking all the boxes. And I say that kind of literally. I don't want all the boxes checked. If I'm hanging an exhibition, I have everything on my to-do list done, it probably means I didn't have enough ideas. And the biggest thing I've learned is that I really don't need a plan, at least not the kind of ABCD done kind of plan that I used to really depend on. Because for me, the strongest blossoms came from a place that I wasn't really even intending to grow. So I'm going to leave you with a little bibliography. Thank you so much. Those are great questions. And to answer your first one about how did I decide how to print things, I did some experiments locally, and I had done those wall art pieces with some local printers. But when it came to doing the first 1,000, I needed it to be relatively inexpensive, because 1,000 of something's a lot. And so I did an internet search for and they were all square. So I did an internet search for who will print my Instagram, right? And I found a company that I just tried it out. It was relatively inexpensive, and they came back, and I really liked the color. And I also really liked the weight of the paper. So I've been using that same printer now for a while, because when you score things like this, you kind of need to know how the paper's going to react. And I also know how big I can make these before they start falling apart and all of that. The second question, do I work with other medium? I do. I kind of dabble, and I've realized that the balance between the digital practice, which, by the way, I've got a little iPad here running the whole series for you. It runs about 2 hours, so you won't see it all. But I needed something tactile which it's funny, and our global partner would be very happy. I use Adobe Fresco as my drawing tool. But it's funny, it feels tactile to me. I can suspend my disbelief and feel like I am painting with watercolor or whatever, even though it's plastic on glass, right? But I did need something more tactile, and that's why I moved to the paper sculpture as well. So that's a great question as well. And so when I first started doing these, it was hour. I would spend an hour a day. And because I had unstructured time. Nowadays, it can be anywhere from an hour to 6 minutes, or something in between. So it's really variable. And it's usually what I'm trying to do. I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm always reworking the piece before. So unless I forget a day, which has happened, I have missed 12 days over the last 7 years. But so there's always a starting point, and that's, so it isn't you have to create something totally new every day. Yeah, that's a great question. Do I question it, and am I going to run out of ideas? I think that's kind of, I question myself oh, how long can I commit to something, right? I don't really know. But I also, if if I suddenly stop, that's okay, but will I ever run out of ideas? I think I kind of have like I would say almost like a cheat sheet of like, okay, if I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this thing and I don't know what to do with it, here's like a bunch of things I try, like, copy this part, or like paint over everything you don't like, or copy this part and flip it around. And in digital, there's so much that you can do, just like filtering too. So I'll try like filtering, or sometimes I'll just write, kind of free write on top of it and let that guide the next composition. So I don't think my ideas are going to dry up. If they do, then I'm going to be at that white screen again, where I'll be having another crisis and have to find something new. I'm going to try to answer as best I can. I mean, one is that in digital, from my story that my art background is from the 90s, so this didn't exist, right? What I was doing didn't exist. I did a lot of printmaking work in the 90s, and one of I did a lot of monotype, which is the kind of printmaking you do without plates. Like, so you can like run something through a press, and then you have kind of this ghosty image. And it's so interesting to me how similar my digital practice is to monotype printing that I did in the 90s. But then the other question, or the other part I think of your question, was about like going from digital to physical. And so I think I was disappointed at one point when I realized like all of my artwork, it's just like in this device, it isn't anything except for my experience, right? So, and like I said, with the first 1,000 and those other installations, I needed to actually see it, so that's kind of what. Oh, and by the way, I consider what I do is actually 4D work, because it is time-based as well, and it has like the dimensionality in it. And I mean, maybe there's even another dimension, because digital work is so layered, and one of the cool things about it is you can export a video that shows everything that you did. So anyway, there's like, I'm gonna spin. Come talk to me later. Oh my gosh, there's so much here. Okay, so the funny thing is that one of the reasons I started in digital is I wanted to get stronger with color. Like, I felt like I was kind of like, I didn't have a good grasp of how to use color. And digital is awesome because you have infinity colors. You have colors you can't print, like, so, and you're not trying to mix paints or waste any materials. Oh, and there's no cleanup. So color was like kind of where my head was originally. And if you see my early works, which you won't, because like I said, that slideshow is like 2 hours long, but they're kind of basic in color, and they're highly saturated, and like they're kind of one color thing. And then as I kind of moved through this process and it became more of this journal, that kind of disintegrated, and it became more like emotionally based color. But then to the other part of your question, which I think is about the bigger installations when they're designed, I will think about, they're all designed. And so this is kind of funny because my daily practice is super free, but what I install is, it does have an ABCD done kind of plan. It's like although I don't always know what it's gonna look like. So the process will go something like this: print out all of the images, now sort them. And that sort process takes, I should get a robot to do it, because it takes me like hundreds of hours to sort all of my images by color and value. And then there'll be some rules for how to assemble it. So in Feedback Loop, it was like going to be sort of this helix shape. But the other funny thing about this is, because I now use my Daily Art Habit series as a palette for my installation work, you'd think, there are times that I'll be looking at something and I'm like, is this purple or orange? Dang it, I don't know. And so you think like, oh, does that, I'm really try, and I think I'm pretty successful at not letting the design tell me what to make. Like, I need more purple. I know I need more purple. I know I need more yellow, but I'm not going and like being like, oh, I'm gonna go make a yellow piece today because I need more yellow. So that's an interesting line.